All right. Hi, everyone. It's 1 o'clock. So we're getting started with our webinar. We're going to be discussing how to create a data culture within enterprise manufacturing companies. Today, we're joined by players within Amplifi and Stebo Systems, and we've got a wealth of knowledge on the table to bring this information to you. I'm Tracy. I'm the North American Marketing Manager for Amplifi, and I'm going to take the time now to introduce you to our panel of experts. All right, and just a quick note, in this very short introduction here, you may hear my 1-year-old scream in the background, but that's just, she just does that. So starting off, we have James Van Pelt, who is the North American practice lead for manufacturing at Stebo Systems. He brings over 25 years of manufacturing experience, leading several fabrication and processing companies, along with being regional president of the MSCI, the largest trade association of the metal industry. Having been a major stakeholder and owner in prior roles, he has successfully led several digital transformation projects and enjoys sharing his insights so others may realize the maximum value from similar initiatives. Great to have you on the panel. Thank you for coming, James.
Great to be here.
Next up is Amitra. Amitra is the Stebo practice director at Amplifi. She has years of experience working in the MDM space. She is responsible for diving into technology platforms to not only understand feature functions, but also how to solve client use cases, leveraging new partnerships, as well as internal enablement of delivery and sales. Thanks for joining us, Amitra. And then we have, last but not least, Brandon. Brandon is an area vice president at Amplifi. He has over 12 years of experience in tech sales. He has worked across all major verticals from manufacturing to healthcare to FinServ and retail. His role at Amplifi is to ensure the client's vision of their business solutions are achieved by the Amplifi resources. Thanks for joining us, Brandon.
No, thanks for having me.
All right, so I'm going to disappear and I'm going to let these experts take over. So I'm kicking it off to you, Amitra.
All right, thanks, Tracy. All right, so today we're going to be focused on creating a data culture. And one of the things that I wanted to open with to really set the scene is a quick statement, right? So there's a big difference between just using data and being a data-driven manufacturer. So what does that mean exactly, right? When we think about the distinction between an organization that is utilizing the data that is available to them, it's probably consequential. They're probably juicing it for as much value as possible versus a data-driven manufacturer that's really hyper-focused on creating a culture centered around their data and getting it to a place with, the governance and the principles that they can utilize data as a tool and then obviously make critical decisions, right, to support their business and grow their organization. So with that being said, we're going to jump into some really good stuff as far as focus areas. So things that I've seen, obviously Tracy gave a glowing intro for Jamie, so I know he's going to have a ton to say about some of the stuff on the next slide. So let's get into it.
Sure.
All right. So first thing, I know with the Amplifi, prospects and customers that we talk to on the manufacturing side, risk mitigation and compliance is a huge use case, right? It's a huge focus area when it comes to being able to obviously support their compliance, regulation standards. It's critical to have accurate data, right, to get those insights. But I do want to kick it to Jamie to see, from your experience, what have you seen when it comes to really putting data at a forefront to focus specifically on risk mitigation and compliance?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at them all. They're all kind of core areas where governed data can give greatest insight to not only just operations, products, suppliers, customers, and other critical data points for accuracy, consistency, efficiency, and most of all, transparency. But the first one you talk about is risk. This is something we like to talk about a little bit as a global local situation because you have global enterprises, but they have to be regionally localized. And that includes whether or not it's the enterprise itself, whether it's the product, but there's different risks and compliances that one would need no matter where they are. Someone in EMEA would need certain compliances and risk mitigation, whether or not it's data governance, whether or not it's data privacy. It could be right down to product specifications, could be ESG data. And we're over here in the United States, we could be working on a completely different set of rules and regulations. So looking at them, it's very important for any enterprise, especially selling globally, to position their product instantly in the area that it's being sold, and also projecting your company that complies with all the different risks and regulations that are available.
Yeah, and Jamie, when you obviously stress that there is an impact to the bottom line, right? When it comes to not adhering to those particular things, and then obviously
fine avoidance is very, very good for anyone. But more so, it also draws back with a lot of products. It kind of holds back the go-to-market if you realize you're in non-compliance or your strategy isn't aligned with that regionalized area. You're going to have a delay, and those who are not first to market are usually the ones that suffer the most.
Absolutely.
And
I love
the next one.
Yeah, I was just going to say it. I love the natural segue to speed to market. I would say that obviously, especially focused on product in particular, this is a big one, right? All of our, I would say, customers that we work with, this is going to be a key KPI for them when it comes to them doing an initiative, right? That's centered around creating a data culture. Obviously, being able to get their product to consumers faster. The one thing I will say, especially within the manufacturing space, is this one, to me in particular, has, I would say, so many different branches, if you will, right? So there may be some people that think about, hey, I need to get my products to the web, or I may need to get them to this retailer or this distributor. So I'm really focused on more downstream, right? So top off data, rich information, et cetera. And then there's the flip side of saying, well, I work in a manufacturing facility, right? So I obviously have a huge impact on how quickly these products are getting to consumers. So how can I benefit from the data, right? So I think there's obviously different stakeholders, different areas in the process to think about that could all benefit from this, but I'm going to let you chime in there as well.
Yeah, this is where you really definitely look at channels, because a lot of manufacturers out there aren't that close to the consumer. You have a lot of business to business, the people that are just making a component that goes into another value component, into another one. Before you or I even see that product, it could be a gear on a Boeing aircraft. You and I don't know what that is, and nor would you need product information on it, because you're not going to buy it. You and I are not going to buy it on Amazon. So that product data could be anything from internal data that helps their internal enterprise recognize complementary goods, the bill of materials and raw materials that went into making that, basically the product's DNA, and other information that needs to be consumed internally so they can align that properly before it's even staged to a consumer out there. Then once it's out there for a consumer, then having all the, again, global localized information that, because there's certain areas that need this particular information or that particular information, to be able to seamlessly post it to the web, digital catalogs, understanding various channels, because sometimes you have distributor agreements where consumers can't buy your products directly. They got to go through a distributor, or another one has a license agreement to have a special brand or whatever you have that you're producing for various channels. It needs to recognize that and separate them out. And that's a time-consuming process for anybody, whether it's internally, understanding the hierarchy, understand those complementary goods, but then also externally to understand the different channels, markets, consumers, localized information, all on down to all the little specifics that you can't think of, whether or not it's separated languages for a specific area. Being able to automate that process and release a product simultaneously globally is a huge time saver.
Yeah, and I love that call out around this being critical in those processes or those flows where it isn't even consumer facing, right? So to your point, I could be manufacturing a given component that's going to go into the sellable good, but it's still so critical. And I recall a conference that we were all at actually a few months ago, and was having a conversation with one of the attendees, and he was talking about issues within the manufacturing plant and saying, like, this is something that's probably happening consistently, but no one's gathering any information around when this issue arises and how we can actually correct this or know when it's going to come, which is obviously a disruption, right? And getting that product manufactured. So I think there are obviously, I'm going to say the business as usual processes, and then we have those areas where issues may arise, where having data and insights to reference for how things should go, and also when they don't go well, right? To make some decisions on how to shift things and make corrections is also super critical there. Now, a big one, obviously, we live through the times where I remember every day I would wake up, there would be something about supply chain. So supply chain resilience, I know, is a huge one. So I definitely want you to cover this one for the audience, JB.
Yeah, when COVID hit, and I take it even back when I was owned a manufacturing facility, scouring the planet, basically for new suppliers was very difficult because it wasn't easy. A lot of manufacturers and suppliers, as much as they may have a presence on the web, they're not easily found. And when something happens, whether or not it was the pandemic or whether you have disruptions based off of geopolitical reasons, whether or not it's it could be anything out there, all of a sudden you may find yourself looking at a second and third tier supplier. Well, many of them already have their obligations to their chief customers. So you end up going, I have nowhere to go. So finding those and being able to organize various suppliers and vendors across, across the entire globe is so critical. But also, what does it take to onboard them? What processes and regulations and compliances do you need to see first before you can consider them a supplier? So taking all of that into account first and being able to organize and getting some of that paper trail and understanding what they need, what you need from them back, and being able to onboard them allows you to basically have visualization into where they are, what they stock, how quickly they can get it to you. Could even connect pricing. There's a way to even do FTP sites through a hotshot too. You can also look at their inventory. So being able to have that buyer enablement is absolutely huge, because when things and people start scrambling, everyone's scrambling for the same person. So the first one to find stock on the shelves, just like anyone's experience around Christmas time for a hot toy, you want to know where it's at and be confident that you're shopping in the right area.
Sure. I know we're going to get into kind of the multi-domain, the system visibility, ecosystem stuff in a bit, but I love the call out around onboarding those suppliers and that interaction, right? Because when we think about it, that is just another data exchange, right? We have this concept of external data that we're going to need to drive these processes, and then obviously the internal data culture. But I can say with working with organizations that take on initiatives like this, it spills outside of the organization, right? When you have data needs and requirements for external parties, you might have some requirements for them, right? So they're going to actually play a role in this as well, and we'll get into some stuff later.
The one other important thing is make sure it's scalable with stuff with supply chain, because you're starting to bring in the AI factor, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But utilizing that to scour the globe to find suppliers that you may or may not know or use the wrong SEO terms on a website. It helps kind of bring about suppliers you didn't know about. Forget the ones you vetted and brought on board. Think about the ones that you don't know of that your competitors do. So that's where maybe being scalable for that technology is going to be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, another one. I don't know if it's a buzzword, if we really want to have a huge conversation about that, but ESG. I feel like that's everywhere. Obviously, health and safety. Understanding how important it is for information to be transparent and traceable when we're making certain claims, et cetera. Want to get your take on this one too, Jamie.
Yeah, sustainability is obviously the buzzword of the moment. And as the next manufacturer, I can tell you embarrassingly, it's not really, it's important because you don't want to lose market share because you're not sustainable and you cannot show that compliance. But at the same time, I don't necessarily feel a lot of manufacturers are going to pick up added business because it's more so they're going to lose business without it. So being able to show that carbon footprint, to be able to show it, whether or not it's on a website through product data and such, is very important for a manufacturer. And seeing more and more of that pop up, it's going to be that gold seal standard that people look for in their products. And suppliers are going to choose other suppliers to make sure right up the value chain is a green initiative. and to be able to look at that. And then to go past that into the health and safety, which kind of connects, because you're also, if you have an environmental and a product safe, product, you probably have a very safe environment for people to work in, where you're compliant, where you can, identify risks, connect people to the right MSDS sheets, and even be scalable for the future to give augmented training so people can learn different jobs without actually being put in harm's way.
I completely agree there. And I love the call out. I recently had a conversation with a prospect, and they just kept saying, ESG and sustainability. And it was more of like, well, what's the take on it? And I will say we're fairly aligned there. But getting into operational and multi-domain system visibility, obviously we touched upon a ton of things already. One thing to keep in mind is there are going to be various systems, right, within the ecosystem that are supporting this initiative. Understanding, obviously, where data is, when that data is available, et cetera, is all super important. But I'm going to let you dive into this one a bit more.
You know what? This is where I'll circle back to the data drive. There's a lot of people out there that have a tremendous data drive. You think about somebody whose home you went into and go, gosh, look at all the smart lighting. It recognized me at the front door. It turned on the right music I want. And you sit there and go, gosh, this is where I want to be. A lot of manufacturers who didn't have the benefit of having their co-manufacturers share a lot of information with you are looking at retailing, distribution, and all the innovative tactics and equipment that they've utilized in their business to make themselves operationally efficient. So when they sit there and go, gosh, what do we need to do? And they're looking across an enterprise with 17 different ERP systems. They've got locations that are offline with no sensors on them. They have no visibility into this. Everything's in different formats. And it honestly feels like a shoelace that's been tied multiple times over, and you've just got a big, huge knot, and you just don't know where to start. And that's where it's very important to establish that initial foundation of data governance. Let's start somewhere. Let's start pushing true and accurate data outward. We can connect assets. We can connect different things out there. We give visibility across different formats by normalizing the format. And that way it's shareable. But most of all, it's non-pervasive. Where it comes up underneath, kind of supports and cleanses the existing data, so you now can trust the data coming out of it. Then you can get into the fun stuff where you're starting to do analytics to see, hey, where's our bottlenecks in the facility? How can we replicate this ideal process? I don't have to log off one system and log on another one. I don't have to import and export data constantly. It's having that. Anyone that's done any work before in the system, that time where you got to log off and log on to a different system that's in a different format, it's almost you got to reset your mind. And you'd imagine doing that 17 different times to either access a different system, a different format, get some data off of a new piece of equipment into the factory. It's very time consuming. So having the ability to aggregate all that data into one normalized view helps workflow efficiency tremendous.
Absolutely. And you're definitely driving us to the next one, Tracy, when we talk about the benefits, right? So I think obviously understanding the focus areas and Jamie, great information there around what we're seeing be focused on by manufacturers today, right? So what's critical to their business. But obviously when we think about creating a data culture, we want to talk through what are the benefits? And I love that you hit on another thing around where do you even start, which I know we're going to get to with BP in a few slides here. But you hit it already around normalizing your view across products, right? So being able to have that efficient view, removing those redundancies, right? So if we think about those multiple systems and it's technically the same thing, but it's called something else over here, being able to set that foundation. So it's something that's flexible and reliable, number one. And then I know you touched on scalability too. So I think that's a big one. But anything else you want to add to the normalization before we get to reducing costs?
Yeah, just when you say that scalability, it's so important. I mean, manufacturers, they don't want to see any more of us. They don't want another layer of IT. They would like to just stick with what they have and improve it every so often. But Yeah, to know that you're already aligned into where you want to go, not only tomorrow, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that you have the basis of it is so important.
Absolutely. Obviously, reducing costs and increasing efficiency. When we think about this shift to utilizing data as more of a tool, right? So it's less ad hoc, it's less when I need it, it's fundamental to what we do, right? It's an integral part of the business. Obviously, that's going to set you up for, as you call it, the fun stuff, right? So the automations, the analysis, really using it to make key decisions. But then obviously, I know for us on the Amplifi side, when we're working with organizations, and I think, in the discussion that we were just having there, you can see how big this all looks. People that, oh, we can't boil the ocean overnight. Insert anything else that you've heard here. But once it's something that's foundational, then yes, we're going to scale. We're going to replicate it, right? We talked about these organizations being global. We may start in a given region, realize these benefits, and then continue to scale. Just my thoughts there. But if you guys want to add anything else before we talk about optimizing data flow, please do.
Yeah, no, I mean, it reduces costs just not only by improving the efficiencies, but think of the things that it's giving you insight into the supply chain, whether or not you can control and manage supply chain. That you're buying the same product over and over again globally, probably from the same manufacturer with different distributor hubs that could be charging you something different. And you wouldn't be able to know that unless that's a deduped item, whether or not you have control over that. Next one's predictive maintenance. It's huge, and I know we'll talk about it at other times, but this is where you're using data that basically can anticipate downtime. And now all of a sudden you can reroute production schedules based off of knowing, hey, line 2 is going to go down. Let me reroute it to line 4. The same thing with understanding your supply chain. If it does dry up, now all of a sudden I'm buying product from an area that's going to see tariffs. I got to include that in there. So it's being able to see and have that visibility before it becomes a problem and people go, why are our profits going down? Too much data right now is in a PDF file that was given to you about the month prior. Now you're getting data in real time and be able to react not only off of it, but also kind of brace against it when you can kind of look out and kind of further the matrix on out.
Absolutely. And obviously the data flow is huge, right? So we're thinking about an effective data culture, being able to have a comprehensive understanding and how that data is moving throughout the business, right? So I know you referenced having tens of ERP systems, right? I've spoken to manufacturers where they may have what they call a centralized system, but then to your point, it's regional. And obviously there's so much happening, being able to spot those consistent themes to your point, or, hey, is this something that's being done differently in Europe than it is in the States? Or is this something that we can be standardizing? But when it comes to optimizing the data flow and implementing tools, what are your thoughts based off of what you've seen there?
It's just where accuracy meets efficiency. I mean, it's now being able to trust the data that you're seeing that's being aggregated together. That's the big thing, is that many times you don't know through import, export, multiple formats, mapping this and mapping that. You don't know whether or not you're getting the right information together. And when you're, generating a procurement list based off of demand generation, a small error could mean hundreds of thousands of dollars to a major enterprise. So again, it's making sure you're configuring the right data and knowing and have the trustworthy it's being accurate.
Yeah. And then this one, obviously we talked about how the different items that we're manufacturing might not necessarily be sellables, but in the case where they are sellables and we know they're going to be consumer facing, obviously having the opportunity to provide rich product information to consumers is also a big one, right? So reliable data is a valuable sales tool. I love to research products for days on end before I make a purchase. So I think this one is also something to keep in mind. So anything else that you want to add there, Jamie, please do.
Well, as many people know, a lot of people make purchasing decisions. Probably, I forget what the percentage is, but a Gartner statistic put it in 60 and 70% of people make a purchasing decision before ever speaking to a salesperson at all, or even launching a website. So To your point, they do the research up front. They look for, product information, whether or not it's speaking to them in the localized language. But also it's also taking that data and collecting it and presenting in a way that also has associated products that, hey, not only are you looking at this, but you also could probably use this, this, and this. Sharing other critical information, having it in a very well organized manner. Again, this is one of those cases where you don't want to find out you're organized in a certain way, and then on down the road, someone goes, well, gee, I wish I was there when you first did this because I need you to organize it this way. And that's one of the most important things, is get it right the first time so it can bridge out into a family tree hierarchy and governance that you can keep adding on, scaling on without having to go back and blow the whole organization system up and start over again. And that goes for anyone who's just business, B2C, but also B2B too as well.
All right. Now, I think BP, we talk about obviously where to start in working with different organizations. So I think we had a few questions that maybe in your pursuits you're used to hearing, or some tips that we want to give the audience.
Yeah, definitely. So the first one is, and Jamie kind of hit it on the head earlier in the presentation, is there a quick trick to find out, in your organization has a strong data culture, right? In my experience, the first thing is to ask, like, hey, where is your data, right? And Dimitri, you kind of touched base on this. And a lot of my clients, when we initially start these projects and engagements, they do have multiple ERPs and they are regionalized, but they also have multiple CRMs for their customer data. And before we even get to talking about, supplier data. So that's a whole nother, litany of things. And I always like to use the expression, the oldest, centralized data model is Excel, right? That's what everybody still, to some degree, still uses today. So that, to me, when we walk into these engagements, is I simply ask, hey, where's your data being stored now? If you give me 5 to 10 different locations, okay, we've got a problem. We've got to figure out a way to centralize this to make it easily digestible, not only for kind of the senior exec team, but also kind of for these plant managers of these multiple facilities that they might have to oversee. To Jamie's point, you mentioned this earlier, having a system that'll be able to show you something in real time for each of your locations, whether you're in Atlanta, whether you're in Chicago, New York, or whether you're overseas in Germany or in the UK, being able to have that information. So that, to me, is how we find out, hey, is this company really utilizing data, or is it just data storage somewhere?
Yeah, I think another one that comes to mind for me, especially when we'll have an opportunity and we can clearly identify a champion, they probably sat back and asked themselves the question, are we getting everything we could be out of our data? Mm-hmm. And if we're not, what more can we be doing, right? So then that brings about that incremental approach to it, right? So Jamie referenced it. You got to set the foundation first. So where are you going to start? So it may be a case where an organization may say, I think we've kicked off the journey. We just may not be realizing everything that we want to get out of it, right? So how do we get to the point where we can be utilizing automation, working smarter, doing things more efficiently, and driving critical change in decisions? So I think having that come to Jesus moment, if you will, is definitely where to start. Because the truth is there somewhere, and then we'll figure it out. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you kind of touched base on that. It's also, again, having that champion. It's like, okay, well, we've started this journey, but what is it that we want from this data, right? Do we want better reporting? Do we want to be able to forecast, buying processes better? I think that's a big call out. And the next one, what is the biggest obstacle for manufacturers on their data journey, right? To me, and from my experience in working with the projects that I've worked with some of these clients, it's, Dimitri, you kind of said we have this champion, and it might be one person or it might be an entire team where they recognize the problem, but they are kind of, so to speak, at the bottom of the totem pole, where the exec team, they don't care. They want to know about the bottom line. Like, what's the issue? So it's really telling that story to upper level of like why we need to take data a little bit more serious and why we need to leverage this data to drive more of that bottom dollar.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I think mine is along that same theme, just change management holistically, right? So I think part of that, when we think of change management, we might think of super tactical things. So you may think, oh, we're implementing a new system. That's a tech change. Or, oh, we're implementing some new processes. My team needs to work different. But the key part of it that I think you're referring to, BP, is changing mindsets, right? So I have encountered organizations where it's like, it's just an attribute. What am I getting out of this? Right. So it is truly an undertaking. So I would definitely say it's a huge obstacle. And I see Jamie's chopping at the bit. So I'm going to let him chime in.
I've gone through this several times, and you get people who are going to push back whether or not it's the right solution or it's not. And, one of them is people feel overwhelmed. They'll look and go, there's no way I can do that to my factory. There's no way I can do it. We're just too far behind. But much like an old plasma TV that's sitting on your wall that you're just going, I don't want to take this down, and it's not going to do all the things these smart TVs do. You find a way to stick a Roku on it, connect to your network, and suddenly you got a brand new TV. So there's ways to do it, but it's also showing that benefit. But it's also getting the buy-in, to your point. But it's getting the buy-in that people that were involved with buying. I've seen a lot of $1 million equipment gone in. You just can't throw money at a problem. I can't just put in this new best piece of equipment because I've seen the most advanced nesting equipment in certain facilities. And there was a guy at the end writing it down on the notebook, the data that was coming out of it. It had every single tool imaginable with nothing connecting the data to actually make it useful for analytics. So they just bought an expensive toy, much like buying your parents a smart thermostat. Sometimes they just install a thermostat, don't connect it to anything. Gone are all the benefits that come with it. So it's convincing people, go, look, you may have a bad taste in your mouth from our last investment and never saw the return of it, but we didn't do it correctly. And here's what can happen when we do. So it's kind of erasing those kind of bad, memories is very important. And the next is people don't like another layer of IT. You see a lot pop up around ERP systems now, PLMs, MESs, SEMs, all these other little boutique solutions designed to take a quadrant of what ERP can't do. But in a sense, you're just adding 5, 6 different layers. And that's another roll of the eyes. How many people do we have to train now to get up to speed to be able to do one section of the problem? Do we not have an overall solution that can kind of address the critical points of them all?
No, I think it's spot on. This third question, this is one of my favorite questions, and I think we all have a different perspective of it. Of what's the biggest mistake manufacturers make when trying to develop a data culture? From my experience, and Amisha and Jamie, you guys can feel free to chime in after this, is it's very siloed, right? The project can start off, whether that be in supply chain or it can start off in IT, where they don't communicate. And Amisha, you kind of touched on this before in terms of the change management. There are so many moving pieces when we talk about data and who needs what data to do what, whether that be reporting or forecasting or even just having access to it. A lot of times these individuals come in with, hey, this is my initiative, when we need to be thinking about the business as a whole. Like, how can we better assist the business and ultimately our bottom line?
Let me go next, because that's perfect, because it's it's funny because people do kind of focus in on the immediate problem they have, but in the quest to solve that immediate problem, don't align themselves for the future problems. And I'll give you a good analogy. I had a friend of mine who always come to go, listen, my laptop is slow, keeps buying a new laptop, then something else is wrong. There's a new TV. They had to buy that because it wasn't right. But the truth be told, he had the original router that came with his internet service provider. So he didn't need all these new things. He needed to start at the foundation and kind of solve something that helps enable your smart TV, your home security system, your lighting, speeds up your laptop. So you kind of, because you got so focused in on the laptop, you failed to understand the problem wasn't with the laptop. It was what was feeding the laptop. So again, to your point, it's being too laser focused on the immediate problem and not backing out and saying, look, how's this problem affecting other areas? And what can I do that kind of helps the whole entire roadmap, but also helps my immediate problem?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you guys both nailed it. We work with organizations, I think the ones that realize a lot of benefit and are truly successful take a programmatic approach, right? So they are able to dial it back, take that step back and have a holistic view of what are we trying to help the business do. And there really isn't much of that element, I think, of really underestimating the undertaking. All right. And saying, hey, I'm here to solve this one specific issue, instead of saying, what can what we're doing actually do for the business? Right. So programmatic, holistic view, absolutely.
And Tracy, you want to go to the next one? When we talk about essentially how we look at it is the three pillars of creating the data culture, right? We've talked a little bit about strategy, like where do you start? We've talked about technology in terms of consolidating as well as a lot of moving pieces, whether that be a CRM or ERP or any other tech stack that the organization might have, but also support when we talk about change management. When we look at a strategy, we've kind of touched base on this in those last question is where we have to take more of that problematic approach, right? We identify, hey, this is the issue that we're trying to solve for today, but then how is this going to go for the long run, right? Who else do we need to get involved? This isn't just an IT problem or a products team problem or even just a merchandising team's problem. This is an organizational problem. So how do we get all these moving pieces to be able to sit down and say, hey, this is the route that we're going to take. And this is where Amplifi and Steve can kind of come in and help with those strategy sessions. And even within that, when we look at our tech stack, Jamie, you kind of touched base on this. There are some organizations with 5 different ERP systems, right? Each of them doing something completely different when we can consolidate that into maybe 1 or 2, right? One for North America and one for EMEA. There's a lot of moving pieces when we talk about not only data governance, but also enterprise architecture. We can have all these moving pieces, but Jamie, to your point, now we're just layering things on top of it, trying to solve for another problem that has nothing to do with the initial problem. And we will look at support, right? What are some top considerations? And make sure you touch base on this when we talk about change management, making sure that we have that foundation in place to deal with that. Nobody from the bottom level worker all the way to the exec team wants just an additional layer of not only responsibility, but also work. Right. So how do we get the teams buy-in to support them not only for the initial phase, but also transitioning to the end of the project as well?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's getting that buy-in and kind of showing. It's hard to show people what they don't know. It's funny. It's the chicken and the egg. Is how do I present the data to show that we need data help when I don't have correct access to the data? So again, it's kind of looking at other landmarks or different companies and look at the efficiencies that they've gone through, which, manufacturing, much like themselves internally, are siloed and they don't share a lot of information like distributors, retailers do. So it really takes some work, but once you kind of can show the ROI, I think it's a very streamlined process.
Yeah. Absolutely. And Jamie, I think the ROI bit is where I'll take it a step further and really we'll wrap up with Tracy after this. And I think BP, you may have said it on an earlier slide, is really telling a story. So obviously, to you guys' point, layering on a different piece of technology is, okay, I have a new feature or function. Yay. Like, what is that going to do for us? So really understanding what are the critical use cases, how are we going to get that return on investment, and then executing the strategy.
Yeah. And then I don't know if we spoke much on the technology part, component to that, but, I tend to, this has helped me in my prior, existence as a manufacturer is just having anything that can break down those silos to the ability to acquire, manage, and share information across the enterprise and have that visualization and access to something is so important. Be able to run a simple report, be able to access sensor data, but understand what's going on in the enterprise now, not what happened last month or last quarter. And again, you just need that all access pass underneath to be able to access all those things and share it across, much like a home network router shares things across your home. Just to have that visibility is so key.
This content has been fantastic, guys. Thank you so much for all your expertise that you brought to the table. We do have a couple of questions if you don't mind answering them. All right, so I'm going to start with this one. This person asks, how do we communicate the value of data to higher leadership or executives that are not directly impacted by poor data management?
At least from when people brought it to me, and the ways I looked at it before is you do have to analyze everyone's workflow during the day and how much time is spent doing something about your job, not actually your job, whether or not it's reporting, whether it's something that could be automated. A lot of people get pushed back and defensive of sharing information because they don't want to be out a role. But in many cases, they're busy doing something that runs kind of concurrently with their job, but not actually being able to do their job. So whether it's merging reports, whether it's looking at this, whether it's trying to export something, or trying to just kind of aggregate everything all at once. You show that in the time function and go, look, I spent 3 hours of my day that I could be reappropriated doing something else more efficiently if this was in place. So that's where I would start, is just kind of show, look, I can get through a week's worth of work in 3 days if I could take this off my table.
Mm-hmm. And then to add on to that, from my experience with a lot of my clients, we involve the executive team in early. A lot of times it's hard to get calendars and, again, get their buy-in. Jamie hit it right on the head, showing that ROI, like, hey, this is the issue that we're being faced with today. And typically, if you're talking to a C-level, like a CFO, they want to know, what is the ROI? If I give you $500K for a software and a solution engagement, what are we going to get from that? We're going to get better data. We're going to be able to forecast better. We're going to be able to adhere to all of our clients, whether that be a B2B or even a B2C. So my advice would be starting those conversations with the executive team early and getting them engaged in these processes.
I also want to, something I forgot to mention, this is so important because we always get focused on ROI. And I don't know what the term, we could probably come up with it, but how about return on a previous investment? It's because there's a lot of people that spend a lot of money on their ERP or existing systems that I call sometimes technical debt. And what many of the solutions that we provide can kind of come in there and bring value back into it, bring it to life, kind of like my example of that old TV on the wall. Now suddenly we're going to make it new. So to be able to extend data can revalue and bring things to life that you already are carrying as a cost. And someone sitting in CEO's desk goes, no, you don't have to rip out and replace this whole entire system. All we're going to do is take the best out of it, extend it for analytics, and bring some accuracy to it. So that, again, also is kind of music to an owner's ears, is to know that, hey, I don't have to just delete everything that we just spent 2 years implementing, whether or not it's SAP, migrations, or it's everything else. It's your money didn't go to waste.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great point. All right. So next question. What are the practical implications for manufacturing of a so-called data-driven management?
Can you repeat that?
What are the practical implications for manufacturing of a so-called data-driven management?
Well, I guess I would have to have a specific example of what type. I don't know, Brandon, if this is a little bit more on your alley, but without knowing the exact, manufacturing is very segmented. So the data kind of affects different manufacturers a different way, depending on what type of products they have, what type of process they have, what kind of suppliers they have, and what kind of customers they have. Sometimes it's very streamlined. So a very, simple implementation of data can help all of those things at once. Other ones are a little bit too complex because they have multiple locations, assets, things that are putting things into data lakes, and a lot of external static factors that change frequently, where others that don't. So, I'd need a specific type before I could tell you, because as anyone in manufacturing knows, one is not like the other.
That's great. Okay. So we've been talking about a couple of other really hot topics, and I think this is probably one of the biggest hot topics that anybody's been talking about lately. How do you see AI infusing into data-driven platforms in the near future?
I'll speak for that. It's fascinating because I spoke on it before with supply chain. So, we have supplier onboarding, and, the suppliers that but what about the suppliers you don't know? So when a pandemic hits, or the recession hits, or geopolitical puts in, supply chain constraints or cost changes due to tariffs. Now all of a sudden you're trying to look at, okay, I need, I need to know who to buy from. So AI can kind of step in here. And so you can hot trigger into an ERP that can hit a trigger into your MDM or whatever system that you're using and say, look, you just ran low on this item here. Here are the 4 suppliers that supply it. They're currently out, FYI. Here are 4 people you didn't find. And that's where AI can go ahead and automate that process and go, look, we've already started the onboarding process with them, or you give the permission level to do so. But I mean, there was one right there that talk about you'd be there all day looking for that mom and pop manufacturer that could probably pull you out of the hole, that's located in Indiana, that has one simple website that he built by Wix 5 years ago. And somehow AI, don't ask me how, is able to find them. But there's been actual evidence and examples of that recently where they're able to find and locate it, whether or not it's through Exometry's ThomasNet or other databases, and be able to share that, or it can scour marketplaces and find material that you didn't think was available.
Yeah, and then I'll chime in on that. When we talk about AI, like AI is the new buzzword for all industries, right? But at the end of the day, AI is only as good as the data that is being fed. That I think sometimes gets lost in these conversations. And we can use the new Chat GTP. I think right now, Chat GTP only goes as far as 2000 or 2021. But we're in 2023, halfway through the year. So we're still missing information that needs to be filtered through that. When we look at it from an organizational standpoint, if your data is a mess, at this point, you're just feeding garbage to a Lexus or a Range Rover, however you want to, call it. You're not feeding it the type of fuel that it needs to have that performance output that you're looking for.
All right, and we just so we know, we are not going to be able to get to all the questions that we are getting. And so what we will do is, when I do send out an email with the recording of this webinar to everyone that has registered, you will get the answers to these questions as kind of a write out, or we'll record a recording of the answer for you after the fact and send it as well. A lot of the questions are coming in as anonymous, and we just want to make sure that all the answers are there, but we do have a limited amount of time with these guys, as they do have a very busy calendar. So this will be our last question, and we'll end with this. How can implementing better data governance help make the processes in our plants and manufacturing facilities more efficient?
Yeah, I think I might have touched on this one, right? Shared a little story that I had when I went to a manufacturing conference recently, right? And I think, Jamie, you even gave an example of having the latest and greatest technology in the plant, and then somebody's writing down data points on a sheet of paper, right? So when we think about data governance, is number one, setting the standard. So what data do we actually need to be gathering that's going to support the manufacturing process, specifically in our plants and facilities? And then how is that being entered? So we know right now it's probably painful, right? If you have those 17 systems you were talking about and you're like, listen, is this truly critical to what we need to get done? Let's make it easier, right? So when we think about making it easier, setting the governance around what the standards and the expectations are for that data, and then being able to actually collect it, I think is number one, where to start, right? If you don't have the data, we all know it rings true. What decisions can you make, right? So we have to start by, number one, prioritizing the information. And then I think from there, that's when we'll see the efficiencies, right? So we'll be able to have those moments where I said, hey, 18 months ago, we were running into a lot of instances of downtime. But once we start actually gathering the reasons for that, storing that in a centralized place, now I know, number one, what the fix is and how to avoid it in another plant. And even to take it a step further, if it is, in fact, a gap with the actual equipment that's in there, and you may say, oh, I'm actually manufacturing this given part and something always goes wrong when we do that here, we're going to need to shift the operations. So you're really able to make some critical decisions, I think, number one, but you have to start with the governance.
No, the governance, well, then you're pushing things out and everyone's stunk. It's like having, how many people across your enterprise with a wristwatch that they self-programmed. Everyone's going to be on a different time. So knowing everyone's kind of aligned with the same thing, running reports And on one item code, you may find out the same thing was prevalent in 5 other item codes. So you missed the demand on those 5 items. So having that, knowing that anything that's going new into the system is going to be vetted, whether or not it's an asset, a product, a customer, a supplier, so on and so forth, knowing that it's going to be accurate before it's re-pushed back out to every single system, that gives you the confidence level beyond what you previously had when running reports, analytics, and trying to get visibility into things.
All right, that's great. And we're going to wrap with that. Thank you so much, guys. It's been very very broad in what we've covered here, specifically just for manufacturers. But I think that we gave a lot of the tools that are necessary in order to create a data culture. Just to help back up all the things that you've heard today, we will be sending out access for you to read and learn from our 2 manufacturing specific guides about data quality and governance, as well as creating a data culture. Digest them, learn from them, and we are more than happy to continue the conversation and on Stebo and Amplifi sides, and to further help your organizations be successful in data. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, James. Thank you, Amitra. Thank you, Brandon. And thank you to all of you that have joined us, and have a great rest of your, what is this, Wednesday? All right. Well, have a great day, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you,
Everybody.
Bye.